It was soon after I moved to my new house that I began to notice something strange. At first, I thought it was just an adaptation, a kind of feeling that everyone has when moving to a new place. But over time, I started to hear footsteps in the garden at midnight. This happened almost every night, and it was always the same thing. The sound of footsteps, heavy and slow, dragging on the garden grass. My dog, who was quiet, began to bark wildly, as if he saw something I didn't see. At first, I thought he was just nervous, maybe some animal approaching. But his bark was different. It was a kind of scream, something that made my stomach turn. Most nights, I ran to the window to see what was happening, but I could never see anyone. The garden was empty, only the weak light from the street illuminating the plants and the path. There was no one there. The feeling of being observed only increased, and over time, the uncertainty began to consume me. What made me most uneasy was the fact that the dog seemed so disturbed, but I didn't see anything. Until one day, at the height of my curiosity and fear, I decided to try something different. I would no longer just look out the window. I was determined to understand what was happening. I decided to watch the garden that night, hidden, without making noise, without letting the dog see me. At midnight, as usual, the steps began. The sound was the same as always, slow and dragged, as if someone was walking slowly through the garden. The dog started barking, but I was silent, tense, waiting to see what would happen. I looked out the window of my room, trying to stay calm, my breathing heavy. The garden was dark, except for the weak street lights that barely illuminated the path. The feeling of being watched was almost palpable. My eyes were fixed, trying to distinguish any movement, when something unexpected happened. There, right in front of my window, there was a standing figure. I couldn't really tell if it was a person or something else. The silhouette seemed to move slightly, but not naturally, as if it were frozen at one point. I could clearly see that I was looking at my window. I wasn't a normal person. I couldn't understand what it was. There was no sound, no movement, but I was there, standing, looking at me what seemed for endless minutes. My heart raced, and a horrible feeling of cold took over me. I felt a lump in my throat, a pressure that prevented me from reacting. The figure didn't move, he just watched. I was paralyzed, my eyes fixed on that figure, unable to look away. The dog, who was barking madly before, was now in total silence, which only increased my feeling of strangeness. I didn't know if I should call someone, or just run away from there. Everything seemed so surreal, so out of place. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing a trick, maybe a game of light and shadow, or some illusion caused by darkness. But as time passed, the fear only increased. I decided to act. With a trembling hand, I took my cell phone and quickly called the police, but without the courage to take my eyes off the window. I told them that I had seen a person in my garden, although I didn't know exactly what it was. The voice on the other end of the line seemed calm, maybe even skeptical, but asked me to be silent and not leave the house until the arrival of the vehicle. I closed the curtain, but the fear didn't diminish. I hid in the back of the house, watching through the kitchen window, trying to see if it was still there. The tension was unbearable. I just wanted it to end soon. That feeling of being watched didn't let me go. Every movement I made seemed to be captured by someone who was there, very close. I looked at every corner of the house, as if I expected to see the figure again, but nothing. No shadow. The silence dragged on. The dog, who was restless before, now seemed calm, but with goosebumps, staring at the door. What was going on? I still couldn't understand. Finally, I heard the sound of the siren in the distance, and my heart began to beat faster. I wanted the police to arrive soon, but at the same time, something told me that they wouldn't find anything. How to explain what I saw? I couldn't do it myself. When the car finally stopped in front of the house, I left through the front door, trying not to show the fear I was feeling. The police did a quick search in the garden and around the house, but of course, they didn't find anyone. Nothing. They even asked if I had any more information, or if it was some kind of joke. Of course it wasn't, but I knew that, for them, it didn't make sense. After they left, the house returned to its usual silence. However, what happened that night did not leave my head. For months, whenever the clock hit midnight, I looked out the window, hoping to see that figure stopped again. And in a way, I still saw her in my mind. Something at that moment marked me deeply, and to this day, I can't explain what happened. I don't know what I saw, but to this day, whenever I pass near the house, I feel a chill, as if something was still watching me. When I moved into the new house, everything was so quiet. The change was a little tiring, but nothing that prepared me for what was to come. It was an old house, well located, but I was still trying to get used to the noises of the neighborhood and the sound of the woods creaking at night. It hadn't been long since I felt a little out of place, but nothing too much. One day, when I opened the curtains of my bedroom window, something caught my attention. On the parapet, there was a rag doll, very simple, with embroidered eyes and a strange smile. I didn't think much at the time. I thought some neighbor had left it by mistake. As it was late and I was already tired, I simply took the doll and threw it in the trash. But that night, something happened. I was lying down, already about to sleep, when I heard some weak beats, almost as if someone was trying to get my attention. I went to the window, and to my surprise, there was the doll, exactly where I had placed it, with one difference. A small note was attached to it. The note only said, "Let me in." My heart raced. I didn't know what to think. Was someone from the neighborhood making a bad joke? But why me? And how did the doll return to the parapet if I threw it in the trash? A feeling of discomfort took over me, and as much as I tried to rationalize the situation, a part of me couldn't help but feel a chill. The next morning, still feeling that weight in my chest, I thought maybe it was something innocent, a children's game of the neighbor. They seemed to be the naughty type, always running down the street and making a mess. I saw them from time to time, but I never spoke to them directly. Maybe some of them would have put the doll there, thinking it would be funny. I decided to ignore it, since the night was quiet after that episode. But as the day went by, I started to get more restless. How could something so simple affect me so much? I went to the market, bought a bottle of wine to relax, and then I went to the window to see if the doll was still there. To my surprise, the parapet was empty. I felt a momentary relief, thinking that maybe everything was just an illusion. Maybe my tiredness would have made me see things in an exaggerated way. But when I started to close the curtain, something made me stop. There in the corner of the window, the doll was again, but this time it was a little closer to the window. And the ticket? There he was too again with the same message. "Let me in." My body frosted. It couldn't be a joke. No one could have put her back there so quickly. I was alone at home, and the idea of someone watching and messing with my things in my absence made me panic. Something was definitely wrong. I was so angry and scared that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I decided I needed to talk to the neighbors and clean it up. I took my key and left quickly, without even worrying about changing clothes, still wearing what I used to sleep. The neighbors live right there. The house is very close to mine, so in less than 5 minutes I was already in front of their door. I hit hard, almost not caring what it might look like. The door was opened quickly, and the woman who attended seemed to be doing something at home, maybe having dinner or watching TV. But her gaze, when she saw me, was surprised. She asked what I wanted, and with her voice altered by irritation, I immediately asked, "Are your children who are leaving a rag doll on my window? And putting strange notes saying, 'Let me in'?" She looked at me for a moment, not knowing what to answer. I could tell she was uncomfortable with my question. But soon she told me, in a tone that tried to be calm, that her children were at school, and that there was no way they were doing that. It wasn't the answer I expected. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to be rude, but I was also suspicious. She seemed genuinely surprised, but what made me more uneasy was the fact that she didn't seem to know anything. There was no sign that her children were involved, but what if they were joking, and she just didn't want to admit it? I couldn't ask any more questions, so I ended up just saying that the situation was making me uncomfortable, and I left there quickly. I came home still with my heart racing. I was torn between anger and fear. Somehow, the neighbor's explanation didn't convince me. If it was something simple, a child's prank, I would understand. But the fact that she was so evasive, of not knowing anything, only made me more suspicious. Suddenly, all the little beats and noises I heard at night began to make more sense. They were no longer just jokes. They were no longer just things I was imagining. That night, when I lay down in bed, the lights were off and the house seemed strangely silent. I lay there, with my eyes wide open, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't relax anymore. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by a low sound, as if something had fallen. I got up immediately, my heart beating harder. I walked slowly to the window, with fear consuming me at every step. When I looked outside, what I saw made me freeze with terror. There, on the windowsill, was the rag doll again. But this time, there was no ticket. Just the doll, smiling in a way that seemed sinister. Panic took over me. I didn't know what to do, or what to think. That didn't make sense. I had already thrown the doll away. I had already talked to the neighbor, but she was back, and this time without a ticket. I looked around the house, as if I expected to see someone outside, but everything was quiet. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't see shadows moving, nothing. Just the disturbing silence. I then decided that I wouldn't wait any longer. I was going to face that once and for all. I took the doll without touching it much, and put it in the trash once again. I didn't want to see that anymore, but a strange feeling persisted. I felt that it wasn't over. The next morning, the day passed without major incidents. But at night, something changed. The knocks on the window started again. As if it were a pattern, a specific time of day. As the night progressed, I felt my heart beat faster. It was always at midnight, and always with the same intensity. It was a dry, repetitive beat, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I hesitated, but I couldn't let that control me anymore. I got up with an impulse of courage and went to the window, determined to face what it was. I looked outside, and everything was dark. The only light came from the streets and trees in my garden. Nothing moved. I didn't see anyone, nothing that could justify that sound. The wind was calm, and there was no sign of anyone or something that could have hit the window. The feeling of being observed increased. It was as if something or someone was there, just waiting for me to look. The cold that ran down my spine was indescribable. I tried to rationalize it, but it seemed that something inside me already knew it wouldn't be that simple. I closed the curtains quickly, but the feeling that I was not alone in the house only intensified. That night, I went to sleep with the light on, but I couldn't relax. With every snarl of the house, my heart was racing. I closed my eyes, but something told me I shouldn't. Finally, I gave in to fatigue and slept, but the nightmares caught me soon after. I woke up several times, and every time I looked out the window, the doll was there again. There was no explanation for that. It was as if she had materialized out of nowhere, without anyone having touched her. I was terrified, and the feeling of helplessness was even worse. It wasn't just child's play. Something much more sinister was happening. I was determined to put an end to that situation once and for all. It didn't matter anymore if it was children's play, or if there was something else behind it. I was going to end up with that doll. With anger, I picked her up and took her to the garden, where there was a small bunch of dry branches and leaves that were already there, accumulated for a few days. I lit a fire and put the doll directly in the flames. I saw the fabric melt slowly, the smell of burning cloth mixed with the smoke. It was as if a heavy load was being removed from my shoulders. With every piece that was consumed in the fire, I felt a growing relief. When the fire finally went out and only ashes remained on the floor, I felt that, finally, everything was over. No more beats, no more messages, nothing. I was at peace. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe calmly, with the certainty that that nightmare had come to an end. I've always been a person who believes more in what I see than in fantastic stories, but what happened that night makes me question everything. I was at home, any night, alone in my room, watching TV. The house was quiet, as usual. The only thing that was heard was the low sound of the television and the occasional pop of the woods in the house. In the middle of the movie, I started to hear footsteps. Slow and heavy steps, as if someone were walking down the corridor. I thought it was my mother, who was in the back of the house, in her room. I always did that, walked to the hallway to do something and came back, so I didn't worry too much at first. However, something made me stop and pay attention. The steps were very close. When I called for her, asking if she was going to the living room, the answer was what made me swallow dryly. "I'm here in the kitchen all the time." She seemed to be really busy preparing something. I was silent, trying to process what I had just heard. "What do you mean?" The steps had stopped right at the entrance of my room, as if someone was there, on the other side of the door, watching me. I couldn't focus on the TV anymore. The sound of my breathing mixed with the silence that took over the house. I stood there for a moment, waiting to hear the steps moving away, but nothing happened. The silence was present, even heavier now. The door to my room was ajar, and I started to have a strange feeling, as if someone was at the other end, watching me. My heart was racing, and the feeling of being watched only increased. I looked at the corridor again, trying to visualize any movement. There was nothing, only the heavy silence and a slight feeling that something was not right. I took a deep breath and decided to leave the room to check. When I passed through the door, the hallway was empty as expected, but the feeling that someone was there didn't leave me. The house was well lit, and there didn't seem to be anyone around. I called my mother again, but she was in the kitchen, busy with something. I went to the living room and the dining room, and everything seemed normal. But something in the atmosphere was different, as if the house was heavier. I looked at every corner, hoping to see some figure, but nothing. I knew what I had heard. I wasn't imagining things. That sound was real. I went to the end of the corridor, with the feeling of stepping on eggs. When I passed through the door of the next room, she hit with an unexpected force, as if someone had closed it abruptly. The noise was so loud that I almost got scared. I looked at my mother, who was right behind me, and she also looked scared, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to disguise the tremor in my voice. She just nodded, not knowing what to say. I knew she was feeling the same way. There was no one there. The house was empty, except for both of us. The doors were closed, and so were the windows. Everything seemed safe. The feeling of discomfort increased, and a chill ran down my spine. We started looking at each other, both trying to process what was happening. "Maybe without realizing it, someone came in," my mother suggested, her voice trembling. But that didn't make sense. The house was locked under locks. There were no signs of burglary. The idea that someone was inside our house, without us noticing, seemed impossible. But the noise, the sound of the steps, and the slamming door, could not be ignored. Something was happening, and the feeling that we were not alone in that house was palpable. I looked once again at the dark corners of the corridor, but there was nothing. Just the silence, and the growing fear that maybe there was something we couldn't see. The tension in the air was dense, as if the silence itself was watching us. My mother and I stayed there, standing in the hallway, our eyes fixed on every corner of the house, trying to understand what was happening. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, my mother suggested that we go to sleep. She, trying to stay calm, said that maybe it was just the wind or something out of place. But neither of us believed much in this explanation. We went back to our rooms, but fear was still hanging in the air. I locked the door, as I always did, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. I lay down, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for any sound or movement. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sleep. Fear had settled in, and the thought that something or someone was lurking became a constant presence in my mind. The dawn passed slowly, but nothing else happened. The next day, everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. But since that night, a strange feeling has never left me. Even now, years later, I still can't forget those steps in the hallway and the door slamming by itself. As if someone had stopped there, at my door, just to watch me. And the feeling of not being alone, even when I am, continues. I don't know what happened that night, but something still remains in the memory, and perhaps in the very air of the house.